20 years ago, the year of 2004 was a great year to be a game fan, to be a Nintendo fan, and to be a Metroid fan. One of the best examples of this is E3 of 2004, which happens to be the one E3 that I did attend in person, which I've mentioned many times over the years. And of course, Nintendo's showcase at E3 of 2004 is widely considered to be the best singular showcase in E3 history. And I certainly agree with that for a variety of reasons. Not only did it have the reveal of Twilight Princess, that's considered the most famous moment of E3, but it also started in pretty spectacular fashion.
My name is Reggie, I'm about kicking ass, I'm about taking names, and we're about making games.
That's right, the very opening game, right after Reggie Fils-Aimé introduced himself to the world for the first time, they showed us Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. And of course, Metroid Prime 2 Echoes is what we're going to be talking about today. It was exactly 20 years ago as of this recording, on November 15th of 2004, mere months after that E3 presentation that you just watched and that I was just discussing, that Metroid Prime 2 released on the Nintendo GameCube, and what a day it was for Metroid and GameCube fans. It comes as no surprise to any of you who've been following my channel over the years that not only is Metroid my favorite series, but the original Metroid Prime, 2002, on the GameCube, is my number one favorite video game of all time, and at this point, I don't know if any game will ever surpass it. But make no mistake, by the time November 15th, 2004 was rolling around and Metroid Prime 2 Echoes was getting ready to release, I was so excited. It was the second Metroid game for the GameCube and the first sequel, the first new Metroid game since I became a Metroid superfan and decided that Metroid Prime was my favorite game of all time. So I was right there, living in the moment, in my mid-20s, working as an assistant manager for GameStop, by the way, with the history 6 months prior of having attended E3 and even played the game at that show. I could not wait to get my hands on my own copy of the full complete game of Metroid Prime 2. Something else I've mentioned over the years, and I referenced it at the beginning here, is that yes, I did get to go to E3 in 2004. Probably my favorite moment in gaming of all time, simply because of what that meant and represented. That was a time where they weren't selling tickets to the public for just any person to get in. You had to have some kind of a connection, and myself and a roommate and friend of mine both worked as, I think we were both assistant managers at GameStop, which was our connection to get credentials in. And then my girlfriend at the time worked for Suncoast Video, if anyone remembers when Suncoast Video was a hot movie store, DVD and VHS store to shop at, and that counted as kind of like an industry media kind of credential that allowed her to also get a badge and attend. So the three of us drove from Denver to LA in 2004, May I want to say it was at the time, and attend the show. Now I have a ton of physical photographs, a couple of different albums worth of photos from that time, and I'm really glad that I still own all these photos. And you can see, this is obviously in an era where we had to print out our photos and get them developed at a store. So all I can do is take photos of a photo. And looking through all of the photos I have, I thought I had more pictures of the Metroid Prime 2 booth or me playing the game. And the only one I actually could find in my hundreds of photos is this one that I'm not featured in and no one else is featured in, but you can just see the Metroid Prime 2 kind of booth there in this photo, which is very cool. And just for more proof, photo evidence of me actually being there, here's just a couple of other quick photos. Me playing Geist at the Nintendo booth, which was very cool. Me playing Resident Evil 4, which was a massive deal. And then here's a picture in our hotel of me and my friend and roommate who came along with us, and you can see us holding up our E3 badges. It was such a great time. Wonderful memories of this. Anyway, the whole point is, I can't believe it's been 20 years since Metroid Prime 2 came out. Because like I said, while I grew up as a Metroid fan, and I grew up playing the original game as a small kid on the NES, and I played Metroid 2 on the Game Boy, and Super Metroid, of course, on the Super Nintendo, Metroid Prime was the turning point for me. I just loved that game. And so, to be able to be working at GameStop as an assistant manager, doing my best in the year build-up to tell people, hey, I know Halo 2 is coming out on November 9th, but just a week later, Metroid Prime 2 is coming out, and you should also buy and reserve this game. And a lot of people did on my suggestion. And so what do I think of Metroid Prime 2 being a sequel to my favorite game, and someone who played it in its day as it released in 2004 as a 24-year-old? I love it. I've always defended it. It is kind of in the realm of, I think, the Metroid Prime games and saga. I kind of see it as the black sheep game that not a lot of people think about when they think of Metroid as a series or Metroid Prime as like its own smaller series within the franchise. I feel like people always go to Metroid Prime initially and they remember Metroid Prime 3. Metroid Prime 2 has always felt like a game that kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And there are reasons why I understand that, because it's a very unique sequel and it's a unique game within the whole Metroid lineage. It does a few things very differently from any other Metroid game, most notably having a light and a dark world on the planet Aether where you play the game, and then the fact that it is the only game that truly features any semblance of ammo for Samus. Even though it took some getting used to, I personally love how they implemented the idea of ammo, not for her main beam, okay? We have to remember her regular power beam and her regular attacks don't have ammo, but the dark ammo and the light ammo that you use to brilliant effect to solve puzzles, to cross over into the light and dark world of Aether, to fight certain enemies based on if they're light or dark, and get ammo based on using which ammo you're using, and then also collecting upgrades to increase that ammo. It really is brilliant, and it speaks to the larger brilliance, I think, of Metroid Prime 2 and how the game and the world and planet of Aether and the light and dark counterparts is so brilliantly crafted. Without question, it is the most complexly crafted of any Metroid game in the entire franchise, in my opinion. And you have to be very smart, very patient, fight very difficult enemies, and yes, you end up balancing light and dark ammo alongside of that. And you have to do all of this to achieve this goal and to beat the enemies of the game, the Emperor Ing. I mean, there's a whole story component going on here that's very fascinating, and the Luminoth as the light world inhabitants that are at threat from the Ing taking over from Dark Aether. And it's very interesting, and it's a lot of fun, but it is, again, very complex and very challenging. Honestly, I don't think they will ever craft a more difficult Metroid game, in my opinion. Metroid Prime 2, not only is it hard to solve the puzzles, hard to beat the enemies, hard to beat the bosses, and the last two bosses of the game, the Emperor Ing and your final confrontation with Dark Samus, oh my god, so difficult. It is worth noting, it is a Metroid game from the era where they stuck to the trope of Samus loses all her abilities at the beginning of the game, and then you have to kind of gain them back by defeating enemies or find them scattered throughout the world. It does do that, just like Metroid Prime did before it, right? And the setup is unique because she ends up going into the dark world of Aether at the beginning, and she gets attacked by a bunch of Ing, and they steal all of her abilities for the most part, and so you have to keep fighting in Dark Aether what they call Guardians, which is the Ing that stole the abilities and weapons that she had, and you have to beat a Bomb Guardian and a Spider Guardian and a Boost Guardian to gain that back. It's not just finding it throughout the world, you have to get back what they stole from you. And there are two bosses in particular that I think are two of the hardest bosses I've ever played in a video game, and definitely within the Metroid franchise for sure. And that is the Boost Guardian. Oh my god, that thing is so hard. And the Spider Guardian. I think the Boost Guardian is probably the hardest boss in the whole game. Now, I should add a caveat to this, because at this point in 2024, I think that the majority of people who've even played Metroid Prime 2, or at least the version that they remember the most, is the one from the Metroid Prime trilogy released on the Wii in 2009, where they added the motion controls to it, and it's fantastic. However, they were public about this. This was a confirmed fact at the time. They actually made the default difficulty of Metroid Prime 2 across the board easier. So the original GameCube release, the one I held up at the beginning of this video and the one I will always remember the most, that game was so much more difficult than the Metroid Prime Trilogy version of the game. And that's why when I think about the difficult bosses, the Boost Guardian, the Spider Guardian, Quadraxis, hello, which really isn't as difficult as people say. I think with Quadraxis, it's more that it takes a long time and you have to survive for a long time. I don't really think it's that hard, but at the same time, it is difficult, so it is what it is. But like I said, those two specific Guardians, Quadraxis, the Emperor Ing, which is so impossible to me being colorblind, and then the final Dark Samus confrontation, those battles were 2 to 3 times harder on the GameCube version than on the Wii version. I feel like the veteran difficulty on the Wii version of the trilogy is more what the base easy difficulty was for the GameCube version, if that makes sense. And I only beat it on veteran on the GameCube once, and I will never try it again. The point is, though, let's come back to the game and kind of its legacy and why I think it's so important. Because Metroid Prime represented a big shift and a big risk for the series when the GameCube was a brand new console and that generation was just popping off. It was so ahead of its time. It's one of the best reviewed games in history across all video games. And so to develop a sequel that was almost as good while also being more complex is a huge deal. And while no game sold better than Metroid Prime until Metroid Dread came out a few years ago in 2021, Metroid Prime 2 did okay for itself, given the climate at the time, the size of the industry, how the GameCube wasn't the biggest success for Nintendo. It just barely sold okay, all things considered. Metroid Prime 2, like I said, even though I think it's considered the black sheep and people kind of forget about it, I think most people who know the game consider it to be a great game. And I'll be honest, I love all 3 of the main Metroid Prime games. I own them all, of course. But I certainly prefer Metroid Prime 2 to Metroid Prime 3. There are things I like more about Metroid Prime 3 compared to 2. But I actually like the fact that 2 is difficult in the sense that the world of Aether is so complicated in the way it's put together. It's such a weaving web, and you have to be, I said this already, you have to be very smart, very patient, navigating the Torvus Bog specifically, or the Sanctuary Forest, or Sanctuary Fortress near the end. Those 2 worlds, or those 2 maps, I should say, of the planet Aether, both their dark and light counterparts, are very difficult. Torvus Bog gets really crazy when you have to go to the underwater section. It's very, very challenging, and I think that a lot of people probably gave up on the game at the time as well. Because of the bosses, because of the light and dark mechanic. And you know, this was at a time where Nintendo tried the light-dark world thing a few times, most famously A Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo, and then with Metroid Prime doing it in 2004. That was another thing where people were like, oh, I guess Nintendo likes this dark and light world thing, and it worked great for Zelda, and it works great for Metroid Prime 2. Less people played it compared to the first Metroid Prime, of course, and Metroid's never been a huge selling franchise anyway. And as I already referenced, Halo 2, which was the biggest thing on planet freaking Earth at the time, and that was another thing. Working for GameStop, I was very, very much a part of the hype of Halo 2 as well. Halo 2 came out literally a week before Metroid Prime 2, so you have Microsoft's and Nintendo's premier first-person shooting kind of franchises at a time where the first-person genre was really starting to take off, just the very beginning of that franchise taking off. And so Halo 2 was the biggest thing in history ever. I mean, forget about it. It's been eclipsed since with things like Grand Theft Auto 5 in 2013, but in 2004, Halo 2, holy crap. There was nothing. I've never seen anything like that. It was so exciting and so fun, and it was a great game. But Metroid Prime 2, unfortunately, released right after that. And so, luckily, they both had the benefit of being released before Black Friday and before the holiday sales of 2004. But without question, Metroid Prime 2 was overshadowed, just like everything in the entire video game world was, by the release of Halo 2 only days beforehand. Something else that's important for me to mention in this is that Metroid Prime 2 is also the game responsible for introducing us to Dark Samus, which is a fusion of Samus's DNA and Phazon energy from Metroid Prime itself, who you defeated at the end of the first game. And I just think, I mean, you guys know, I'm a huge fan of Dark Samus as a character and as a concept. And the fact that Dark Samus is like this Samus DNA kind of representation of Metroid Prime as an enemy and Phazon as a negative force and energy within the galaxy, it's a really cool concept, and it carried on to Metroid Prime 3. And I still want to believe that there's some way for it to carry on into Metroid Prime 4. It would be tricky for them to write that into the story. I don't think it's impossible. They might have to bend the rules, and we might have to suspend a lot of disbelief to allow that to be part of the story that we enjoy, but I'm open to it simply because I'm a sucker for Dark Samus, and it's not so much that I go into Metroid as a franchise for the story, but I go into it for the lore, and the small bits of narrative beats that continue from game to game and series to series. I've talked about that in the past, and so of the many strong legacies of Metroid Prime 2, Dark Samus is definitely one of the most important ones. But nowadays, we live in a world where Nintendo is doing great. The Switch is one of the most successful pieces of video game hardware of all time. Metroid Dread became the best-selling Metroid game of all time on this console. Metroid Prime Remastered came out to great praise, great reviews, great sales, selling, almost 2 million copies. I know that there's a narrative out there that maybe it's not seen as a big hit. Trust me, that game has done very well for itself, and I guarantee you Nintendo sees it as a success. So in a world where that's happened, we're now waiting for things like a Metroid Prime 2 remaster or re-release or HD port or something to happen with Prime 2 and Prime 3. So now we're at the point where people love and want to replay this game, and they want to see it look even better than it already did. I mean, again, Metroid Prime was so ahead of its time in terms of its graphics and its gameplay and its frame rate. The first game I ever remember seeing 60 frames per second. And with Prime 2 Echoes, they managed to make it look even better and be a bigger, more complicated world and game. I mean, the achievements Retro Studios did with both Primes 1 and 2 on the GameCube before moving to Prime 3 on the more powerful Wii are just unheard of, man. Out of this world. And so, yeah, this was just a way for me to, for 10 or 15 minutes, just ramble on about Metroid Prime 2, my memories of it releasing, playing it at E3, working through the release at GameStop as an assistant manager, sequel to my favorite game of all time, and to just remember, I guess, how old I am, because that was 20 freaking years ago, you guys. I can't believe it. Unfortunately, my schedule at the time of Metroid Prime's 20th anniversary 2 years ago didn't allow for me to make a video, which breaks my heart because it's my favorite game of all time. So I didn't get an opportunity to make one about that, and that makes me sad. But I didn't want to miss at least Metroid Prime 2's 20th anniversary. I was a 24-year-old who got to take that home and play it in my apartment. My roommates were watching, and I was playing that game right away, and it just was the coolest thing, man. So I love Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. Not everyone feels the same, but maybe we get a remaster or re-release or something sometime kind of soon on the Switch, or maybe even the Switch too. So this is to Metroid Prime 2, an amazing game. I hope you've enjoyed it. Share your memories below, and for now, that's about it.